They illegally sold my grandparents' farmland while I was deployed overseas, thinking I'd just accept their fake documents and pathetic settlement offer. But they had no idea who they were messing with. Want to see how I discovered I owned the water rights to their entire luxury development and brought a corrupt HOA to its knees? The certified letter arrived 3 days after I returned home from my third deployment. Exhausted and still adjusting to civilian life, I almost tossed it onto the pile of junk mail. The return address caught my eye. Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. Strange. My modest rental had no HOA. Inside was a check for $4,500 and a letter congratulating me on the successful sale of my property at 1420 Riverbank Road. My blood ran cold. That was my grandparents' address, 15 acres of prime farmland that had been in our family for generations. Land that, according to my grandfather's will, now belonged to me. I called the number on the letterhead immediately. "There must be a mistake," I told the receptionist, my voice tight with restrained anger. "I never sold my property." "Let me transfer you to Mrs. Blackwood," she replied coolly. Victoria Blackwood's voice oozed practiced sympathy. "Mr. Carter, we understand this might be confusing. Your land was acquired through proper legal channels last year. The documentation shows your signature on all the paperwork." "That's impossible. I was in Afghanistan." There was a pause. "Perhaps you signed before deployment? The settlement check is actually quite generous considering the property's condition." I slammed my fist on the kitchen counter. "I never signed anything. That land wasn't for sale at any price." "I have the paperwork right here, Mr. Carter. Your signature is clearly—" "It's not my signature," I interrupted. "I want copies of everything. Today." The documents arrived by courier that afternoon. Sure enough, there was my signature on a dozen pages. A decent forgery, but definitely not mine. The sale date was during my deployment, when I was dodging IEDs halfway around the world. I drove to my grandparents' farm immediately. The familiar dirt road that led to their white farmhouse now ended at an ornate stone wall. "Whispering Pines Estates, private property," read a sign adorned with gold lettering. Beyond the wall, I could see construction equipment moving earth, where generations of my family had once grown crops. A security guard approached as I sat in my truck staring through the gate. "Can I help you, sir?" "This is my land," I said quietly. He looked uncomfortable. "Sir, this is private property under development. You'll need to move along." I pulled out my phone and took photos of the construction. As I turned to leave, a sleek black SUV pulled up. The window lowered to reveal a salt-and-pepper-haired man in an expensive suit. "Mr. Carter," he called. "I'm Richard Davenport, president of Whispering Pines HOA. Is there a problem?" I approached his vehicle. "Yes, there's a problem. You're building on stolen land." "My land." Davenport's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I understand you're confused about the sale. Military service is so demanding, perhaps the details slipped your mind." "Nothing slipped my mind. This land was never for sale." His smile tightened. "The transaction is complete, Mr. Carter. The development is proceeding. I suggest you deposit that check and move on. Your grandfather's outdated farm has become something valuable now." As I opened my mouth to respond, Davenport added, "By the way, thank you for your service," before rolling up his window and driving through the gates. That evening, I spread the fraudulent documents across my kitchen table. The sale price was absurdly low, $4,500 for prime riverfront property worth at least $1 million. Something caught my eye on page 6, a clause stating excluding all water rights as previously established. Water rights? I remembered my grandfather mentioning something about water rights before I enlisted. He'd always been proud that our land included rights to the natural spring that fed the entire valley. The county records office opened at 8 a.m. I was waiting. At the door, still in my military boots and jacket, The elderly clerk, Mrs. Henderson, recognized me immediately. "James Carter, you're back safe. Your grandfather would be so proud." I explained the situation, watching her face shift from welcome to shock to anger. "That's not right at all," she muttered, fingers flying across her keyboard. "Your grandfather specifically put everything in trust for you. Let me pull the original records." 30 minutes later, we discovered the truth. Someone had filed altered property documents while I was deployed. The land deed had been transferred, but one critical document remained unchanged: my ownership of the water rights to the natural spring that fed the entire area. "According to this," Mrs. Henderson said, tapping her screen, "they purchased the land, but you still own every drop of water that flows through it." I stared at the document, a plan already forming in my mind. "Can I get certified copies of everything?" Her eyes twinkled as she reached for official letterhead. "James, I believe we can do better than that." Armed with certified documents proving my water rights ownership, I consulted with Megan Zhao, an old friend who'd become an environmental attorney. Her glass-walled office overlooked downtown, a far cry from my grandparents' farmhouse, but I felt immediately at ease when she greeted me with a warm hug. "They really thought they could pull this off while you were serving overseas," she said, shaking her head as she reviewed the papers. "This is beyond unethical. It's criminal." "Can they get away with it?" Megan tapped her pen against the forged signature. "Forgery, fraud, potentially stolen valor if they used your military service as part of their scheme. No, they shouldn't. But Richard Davenport isn't just the HOA president. His development company has 3 county commissioners in their pocket. What about the water rights?" She smiled. "That's our leverage. According to these documents, you own all rights to the natural spring that feeds the area. Whispering Pines can build all they want, but they can't turn on a single tap without your permission." On my way home, I drove past the stone entrance. Again, the security guard recognized me, his hand moving toward his radio. I simply nodded and continued driving, following the perimeter of what used to be my family's land. Behind the pristine walls, 6 model homes were nearly complete, their roofs gleaming in the afternoon sun. A billboard advertised luxury living, starting at $850,000, almost $1 million per home, on land they'd stolen for $4,500. My phone rang that evening, a blocked number. "Mr. Carter," Richard Davenport's voice was smooth as silk. "I understand you visited the county records office today. You're having me followed. Let's call it staying informed. I'm reaching out because I believe we've had a misunderstanding. Perhaps we could meet for lunch tomorrow to discuss a more appropriate compensation package." "You mean now that I know about the water rights?" There was a pause. "Certain details may have been overlooked in the initial transaction." "Forgery isn't an overlooked detail, Mr. Davenport. I assure you, Whispering Pines acquired that property. Legally, if there were irregularities in the process, they occurred without my knowledge. Let me make this right. Say an additional $50,000 as a gesture of goodwill." I almost laughed. "That doesn't even cover the timber value of the old oak grove you bulldozed. Mr. Carter, be reasonable. That land was sitting vacant, serving no purpose. It was waiting for me to come home." I cut him off. "My meeting tomorrow is with the district attorney, not you." The line went silent for a moment. "That would be unfortunate for everyone involved. Development brings jobs, tax revenue. The DA understands progress. Do you really want to be the one who stands in its way?" After he hung up, I sat on my grandfather's old rocking chair, one of the few possessions I'd managed to salvage before. Enlisting. The threat was clear. Davenport had influence, money, connections. I had the truth and water rights to a dry piece of land. It didn't seem like a fair fight. The next morning, I discovered just how unfair it would be. The district attorney's office called to reschedule our appointment indefinitely. When I arrived at the county building anyway, I found Megan waiting in the lobby, her expression grim. Dear Preston just recused himself from any case involving Whispering Pines, she explained. Apparently his brother-in-law works for Davenport Construction. Now what? Now we go to Plan B. Plan B started with a visit to the local VFW hall, where my grandfather had been a respected member. Commander Wilson, who'd served in Vietnam, listened to my story with growing outrage. They stole a deployed soldier's property, he growled. Not in this town. By evening, a dozen veterans had gathered in the hall's back room. Some I recognized from childhood, others were new faces, but all shared the same look of determination. Commander Wilson spread a map across the pool table. The Carters have owned that spring since before the Revolution, he told the group. James's great-great-grandfather supplied water to the entire town during the drought of 1887. His grandfather let the high school use it for free when their well failed in 85. A retired Army colonel named Frank Martinez studied the property lines. "The spring is here?" he asked, pointing to the blue mark I'd made. "Yes, and it feeds this entire watershed," I confirmed. "Every home in Whispering Pines depends on it." "What exactly are you planning, son?" asked Commander Wilson. "I'm not entirely sure yet," I admitted, "but I know I can't fight this alone." As the meeting broke up, an elderly man I didn't recognize approached me. He leaned heavily on a cane. His VFW cap tilted slightly on his white hair. "You don't remember me," he said. "Harold Jenkins. I worked for the County Water Authority for 30 years before retiring. Your grandfather helped me buy my first house. Nice to meet you, sir." He handed me a thumb drive. "Might find these interesting. Complete water system plans for Whispering Pines. Every pipe, every connection point." He winked. "Just in case you need to know where to turn things off." That night I received another call, this time from a woman. "Mr. Carter, this is Diana Blackwell. I'm the Whispering Pines HOA secretary." "How did you get this number?" "That's not important. What is important is that I have information about how they acquired your property. I've seen the original documents, the ones before they were modified. Why are you telling me this? Because what they did to you, they've done to others. And because they're turning on the water main tomorrow for the model homes. There's a ribbon-cutting ceremony with the mayor. I checked the time. Just past midnight. Can you meet now?" I asked. "Corner of Maple and 5th. 20 minutes. Come alone." The corner of Maple and 5th was deserted when I arrived. Just a flickering streetlight and closed storefronts. I spotted Diana instantly, tall, elegant, nervously checking her watch. She climbed into my truck without hesitation. "I can't stay long," she said, handing me a manila envelope. "These are copies of the original property documents for your grandparents' farm, the real ones, before they were altered." I opened the envelope. Inside were documents showing my grandfather had specifically placed the land in trust for me while I served overseas. No sale had ever been authorized. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. Diana stared straight ahead. "My father owned the orchard next to your grandparents. They forced him out last year. Stress of the legal battle gave him a heart attack." Her voice cracked slightly. "He died thinking he'd failed our family." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be effective. Davenport has the mayor, the commissioners, even the local judges in his pocket. You won't win in court." "Then how?" She pointed to the documents. "The ribbon cutting tomorrow. Every important person in the county will be there, along with the media. Davenport's planning to announce Phase 2, 20 more luxury homes." As Diana slipped away into the night, I called Frank Martinez. "Colonel, how quickly can we gather the troops?" By dawn, our plan was in motion. While Davenport prepared for his ceremony, Harold Jenkins and 2 other veterans who'd worked for the Water Authority located the main control valve for the spring. It was on the edge of my grandparents' property, just beyond the new stone wall, hidden in an unassuming utility box. Still exactly where it was when your grandfather let us install it in '72, Harold said, patting the worn metal cover. At 9 a.m., I visited the local newspaper office. The editor, Jack Thompson, had gone to high school with my father. Military. Hero returns to find family land stolen? Jack mused, reviewing the documents. That's front-page material. And it gets better, I said, explaining the water rights angle. By noon, Whispering Pines was transformed. Red, white, and blue banners hung from the entrance. A podium stood before the central fountain, which would dramatically spring to life during the ceremony. Catering staff arranged champagne flutes on white-clothed tables. I watched from a distance as the mayor arrived, followed by county commissioners and local business leaders. Richard Davenport greeted them, resplendent in a tailored suit, his wife Victoria by his side. Television crews set up cameras, the perfect media event for the perfect development. At exactly 1 p.m., Davenport approached the podium. Just as he began speaking, Jack Thompson arrived with a photographer. Simultaneously, a convoy of trucks pulled up, each with VFW markings and American flags waving. 24 veterans in full-dress uniform emerged, forming a solemn line along the property edge. Davenport faltered mid-sentence as Commander Wilson led the veterans in a silent salute. Confused whispers spread through the crowd. "What's the meaning of this?" the mayor demanded. I stepped forward, wearing my service uniform, medals gleaming in the sunlight. Megan Zhao walked beside me, carrying a thick portfolio. "Mayor Reynolds," I said loudly enough for the news cameras to catch. "I'm James Carter. This development is being built on land stolen from me while I was deployed in Afghanistan." Davenport rushed over. "This is absurd. We have all the proper documentation." "Forged documentation," I countered, nodding to Megan, who began distributing copies of Diana's evidence to the reporters. "And there's something else everyone should know." On cue, Harold Jenkins turned the main valve. The spectacular fountain, scheduled to erupt at Davenport's signal, remained dry. Sprinklers that had been wetting newly laid sod sputtered and died. Faucets in the model homes ran dry when staff tried to fill water glasses. "What's happening?" Victoria Davenport demanded. I held up the certified water rights document. "While your husband was forging my signature to steal my land, he overlooked something critical. I own all water rights to the spring that feeds this entire development. Not a drop of water can legally flow here without my permission." Cameras swiveled toward Davenport, whose face had drained of color. "That water serves the public good," the mayor protested. "It did." Commander Wilson stepped forward. "When the Carters owned it, they supplied water to the town during every major drought for generations. But now, it's being diverted to fill decorative fountains, while the Davenports sell homes built on stolen land." A commissioner tried to intervene. "Surely we can reach some arrangement, like the arrangement you made when you approved permits without proper environmental reviews," Megan asked, pulling more documents from her portfolio. "Or the arrangement that allowed construction to begin before water rights were secured." The news crews were capturing everything. Davenport made a desperate lunge for the microphone. "This is a minor administrative oversight. The ceremony will continue." But it was too late. The mayor was already backing toward his car, clearly wanting no association with the unfolding scandal. Prospective buyers who'd come for the event were asking pointed questions about water access. The perfect media event had become a perfect disaster. "Turn the water back on immediately," Davenport shouted, his composed facade crumbling. "This is extortion." I remained calm. "No, Mr. Davenport. Extortion is forging a deployed soldier's signature to steal his family's land." News cameras captured his meltdown as security personnel tried to usher reporters away. Too late, the story was already breaking. On the periphery, Diana Blackwell quietly handed a reporter a flash drive. 3 days later, the full extent of Davenport's scheme exploded. Across regional headlines, Diana's evidence revealed a pattern. Whispering Pines had targeted 7 family-owned properties surrounding the original development using fraudulent documents, zoning violations, and political pressure to force sales at fractions of market value. The county commissioners called an emergency meeting, suddenly eager to distance themselves from Davenport. I attended with Megan and a dozen veterans in silent support. This council had no knowledge of any improprieties, Commissioner Walsh insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. Then explain why you approved changed property maps without verifying signatures, Megan countered, placing documents on the projection screen. Or why building permits were rushed through without water rights verification. The state attorney general announced an investigation the following week. FBI agents arrived to examine potential wire fraud charges related to the property transfers. Construction at Whispering Pines halted immediately. Davenport's desperate counterattack came in the form of a civil lawsuit claiming I was weaponizing essential water resources. The case landed before Judge Eleanor Simmons, known for her strict interpretation of property rights. In the courtroom, Davenport's attorney painted me as an obstacle to progress. Mr. Carter's vindictive withholding of water access threatens millions in economic development and dozens of jobs. Judge Simmons adjusted her glasses. And the forged documents? The fraudulent transfer of property while Mr. Carter was serving his country. If there were irregularities, they occurred at the clerical level, the attorney stammered. My client purchased the property in good faith. When my turn came, I simply presented grandfather's original deed, the water rights documentation, and my deployment records. Your Honor, I never sought this fight. I simply want what's been in my family for generations, land that was waiting for me to come home. Judge Simmons took only 20 minutes to return her decision. The court finds overwhelming evidence of fraud in the transfer of the Carter property to Whispering Pines development. All transactions are hereby nullified. Mr. Carter retains full ownership of both the land and its associated water rights. She fixed Davenport with a stern gaze. Civil damages will be determined in a separate hearing, and evidence of criminal activity has been referred to appropriate authorities. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Sometimes the little guy wins, I said simply. The aftermath transformed more than just my life. 6 other families came forward with similar stories of HOA pressure and fraudulent property transfers. Each case was reopened. Diana Blackwell's testimony proved crucial in the subsequent criminal trials. Richard Davenport eventually pled guilty to multiple fraud charges, receiving a 5-year sentence. Victoria Blackwood and 2 county commissioners faced probation and fines for their roles. The elaborate entrance to Whispering Pines was dismantled, the stone returned to local quarries. 1 year later, I stood with Harold Jenkins at the spring that had been in my family for generations. The water bubbled up clear and strong from deep underground, beginning its journey through the valley. "What will you do with it all now?" Harold asked, leaning on his cane. I showed him the plans I'd drawn up. Where luxury homes would have stood, I'd outlined community garden plots, a working educational farm, and restored wetlands. The spring would continue supplying water to the surrounding community, protected by a conservation easement. "Your grandfather would be proud," Harold nodded. That weekend, dozens of volunteers, veterans, former Whispering Pines residents who'd reclaimed their properties, even Diana Blackwell, gathered to begin clearing invasive plants Davenport's construction had introduced. As we worked alongside each other under the autumn sun, Commander Wilson approached with an unexpected visitor, Mrs. Henderson from the county records office, carrying a faded metal box. "Found this in deep storage," she explained. "Your grandfather filed it the day you deployed. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed to me. James, if you're reading this, it means you've come home safe, thank God. This land has weathered storms, droughts, and more than a few greedy men over the generations. Its strength is in its water. It gives life freely to all who need it, asking nothing in return. That's its lesson to us. Whatever battles you've fought abroad, remember that the truest victory is in what you create, not what you defeat. Welcome home, son. Grandpa. As the community gathered for a meal at day's end, I realized that Davenport's quest to build an exclusive development had ironically created something far more valuable, a reunited community that had rediscovered its connection to the land and to each other. The spring continues to flow, as it has for centuries. The water rights that once served as my leverage against corruption now serve as my responsibility to this place and these people. What Davenport never understood was that the true value of the land was never about property lines or development potential. It was about belonging, coming home, and protecting something precious, not just for yourself, but for everyone. And it was about legacy. Last month, we held the 5th annual Spring Valley Harvest Festival on what would have been my grandfather's 100th birthday. Over 500 people gathered on the restored farmland. Families whose properties had been saved, veterans who'd stood with me that pivotal day, and newcomers drawn by the community we'd created. Diana Blackwell now runs our education program, teaching school children about sustainable water management. The former security guard from Whispering Pines oversees our community garden plots, having found his calling in growing things rather than keeping people out. Even Judge Simmons volunteers on weekends, joking that she prefers planting justice to merely dispensing it. The Watershed Restoration Project has become a model studied by environmental groups nationwide, where Davenport planned chlorinated pools and ornamental fountains. Native wetland plants now filter the spring water naturally. Fish have returned to streams that had been slated for culverts. The most unexpected development came 6 months ago when the adjacent property, once owned by Diana's father, was purchased by the county using settlement funds from the Davenport case. It now serves as a veteran transition center, offering housing and agricultural training for returning service members. I teach there twice weekly, showing others how to heal through connection to the land. Richard Davenport was released from prison last year. I spotted him once, watching from a distance as families picnicked near the spring. Our eyes met briefly before he turned away. I sometimes wonder if he finally understands what he nearly destroyed. Not just property, but the invisible bonds that tie people to places across generations. The water rights documentation that saved my land now hangs framed in the community center we built using timber reclaimed from the model homes. Beneath it is a simpler document that matters more, my grandfather's letter, reminding us that true wealth flows not from what we possess, but from what we preserve and share. Yesterday, a young Army lieutenant visited our farmer's market. She stopped at my vegetable stand, fingering a tomato carefully. "I just got back from deployment," she said quietly. "Someone told me this was a good place to remember what we fight for." I handed her the tomato. "Welcome home, soldier. Some battles are fought with weapons, others with water rights and legal documents. But the real victory is in what grows afterward. The story of our community's rebirth has spread far beyond county lines. Last week, a documentary crew from a major streaming service spent 3 days filming here, capturing interviews with families whose land had been threatened and the transformation we've achieved. They've tentatively titled it Watershed Moment, How Water Rights Saved a Community. The irony isn't lost on me. The luxury development that would have made Davenport millions has instead made our little valley famous for something far more valuable: resilience. Economists and urban planners now visit regularly, studying how our model of land stewardship creates sustainable economic growth while preserving agricultural heritage. The conservation trust we established ensures the spring will remain protected forever. Local schools bring students for water quality monitoring, and 3 universities have established research partnerships studying our wetland restoration techniques. What began as my fight for personal justice has evolved into something I never imagined, a living laboratory for how communities can reclaim their environmental destiny. Most meaningful are the personal transformations. Mrs. Henderson retired from the county records office last year and now runs our historical archive, documenting the valley's multi-generational farming stories. Harold Jenkins, despite his advanced age, mentors local youth in water engineering, creating a new generation of guardians for this precious resource. The land itself seems to have responded to our care. Wildlife has returned in abundance. Otters in the streams, hawks nesting in trees that Davenport had scheduled for removal, wildflower meadows buzzing with bees where manicured lawns would have dominated. Perhaps the most unexpected chapter unfolded when Victoria Blackwood, Davenport's ex-wife, following their bitter divorce during his incarceration, approached me at the farmer's market, head bowed in uncharacteristic humility. "I came to apologize," she said, "and to ask permission to bring my environmental law students here. They should see what's possible when water rights are properly honored." She now teaches at the State University, her legal expertise redirected toward environmental protection rather than exploitation. I agreed immediately. Redemption stories should be witnessed, especially by those entering professions where ethics and profit often compete. The Veterans Center has expanded to include a specialized PTSD program centered around water therapy. The sound of the spring, the rhythm of agricultural work, and the stability of seasonal changes provide healing that complements traditional treatments. Many participants eventually settle nearby, creating a growing community of service members who understand both the cost of freedom and the value of putting down roots. My grandfather's weathered rocker still sits on my porch, where I often end. My days watching the sunset paint the valley in gold. Sometimes I imagine him sitting there beside me, nodding in quiet approval at how his beloved spring continues to nourish not just the land, but the human spirit. Yesterday, a letter arrived from a national veterans organization notifying me of an award for community service. The ceremony will be held in Washington, D.C. next month. I'm bringing soil from the farm to give to each attendee. A small reminder that what we defend when we don uniforms isn't just abstract freedom, but tangible places where that freedom takes its most meaningful forms. Water continues to be our metaphor and our medium, flowing forward, finding its path, wearing down obstacles, bringing life. Like water, true justice may be temporarily diverted, but it always seeks its proper channel in the end.